Welcome to the Founder Insights podcast by Animoca Brands. I'm your host, Rich Robinson, serial entrepreneur and entrepreneur in residence here at Animoca Brands, where I work with our hundreds and hundreds of portfolio companies to cheerlead, cajole, and counsel them on their Web3 journeys. And today, I'm speaking with the founder of Playground, Jia Ling Yang, or some of you might know her as Linda Yang. She is a powerhouse. She has taken all of that skills, experience, and network from her Web2 days and bringing it for a delightful and elegant experience for the user, creating a social activation platform for modern communities in the Web3 world. LFG.
Yeah, terrific. Yeah, so we're rolling, and yeah, it was wonderful to meet you in person. I know you're actually from the Southwest, but your native habitat of New York City. It really reflects your energy and your sort of just kind of all the possibilities that you're doing with Playground. So wonderful to have you here on the pod.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. That was a really good time at NFT NYC meeting you and getting to host the Animoca family that week. So yeah,
Feels
I
like
love
that
that
was
we're keeping
6
it
months
going.
ago, and that feels like a
It was.
completely different era. Feels like 6 years ago, but yeah. And we talked about some of your activations back then, and tell us here in podcast land about some of the things that you're most excited around Playground right now. What's right under your nose that you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Playground's coming to life and sort of showcasing and living up to its name. Playground is a Web3 social platform meant to, connect communities in order for them to collaborate and grow and organize together. And the past 6 months since meeting you, we have been building a lot of utility. And so now, despite the market, I think the most exciting thing is that we're able to go out and give those builders, community organizers, that utility. So we're onboarding communities, they're activating with us. We had an amazing week at our Basel in Miami, did 4 events, got over 100,000 users from those activations.
Wow.
Yeah, and onboard.
So
Yeah, yeah, and we have been working with amazing communities. One of them was Unrevealed. They hosted 3 to 4 days of events with World of Women and with CloneX. We did our own creator party. We did another event with Decentralization, called the Batty Pool Party that brought together a lot of women in Web3 communities at the Kimpton Surf Hotel. So, riding off of that energy, looking forward to the new year where we want to keep that momentum and sort of partner with all of the brands and communities that are in our ecosystem that are on their way to onboarding and then having these cultural moments in January, February, and list goes on around all of these partnership moments.
yeah, congratulations. 100K signups from an event. Usually a lot of times those things are kind of like theater and they don't really translate into actual signups. So I think it's a terrific validation of what you're doing and really good use of your time and energy at that event. Well done. Yeah, I love the broad cultural applications that you guys have with what you're offering. But I also really love the very, very practical details of how you're enabling that. I feel like things are so kind of disparate and disconnected in many ways, and you've created this very elegant solution to pull things together for Web3, and love to hear about some of those features that you brought to, realization.
Sure. Yeah. I think, we really looked at the pain points of what communities are facing right now. And from the user perspective, the first was discovery. And because things are so fragmented with community discovery, we really brought it all together through a social connected portal. So the first feature is, sort of like how Spotify has a way to explore all the different artists of different musical genres and the music under them. We have a social discovery portal where you could discover all the different communities in art, music, wellness, film, comedy, etc. So rather than, you know, finding members in a Telegram group chat and then managing the memberships in another platform, getting your community together through a different ticketing or hosting site, and then trying to stitch it all together with analytics. We've got one place where communities can manage their communities and where users can discover it on the front end, so that they can kind of portal from one world to another, connect with each other, and just find all of the relevant drops and events and different types of media that the community is sharing.
Super powerful. And you've also um, given the creators the opportunity to token gate their events and to be able to put everything into one spot. Can you just take us through what that experience would sort of feel like for the creator and for the user?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to juxtaposition it really quickly to what we're experiencing now, which is, we're all in these group chats where, you know, an Eventbrite link is shared, or something got minted, or a project is shared, and hey, everyone, come meet me here, or here's a spreadsheet of side events at this conference, like who's going, or hey, like this, my podcast is dropping, our music video just got released. So it's just a link in a group chat, gets lost in a thread, it doesn't convert. By the time you see it, the event's over, the drop has ended, and it's socially posted on Web2 social platforms where it's not designed to be time sensitive. Um, and so you're left with a group chat that doesn't really activate a community. And when the community matures a bit, their only default option is to, go to Web2 social platform, or something like Discord. And for a lot of these cultural communities that put so much craft and love and attention to the vibe of their community, let's say fashion communities or art and music communities, they shy away from some of the other alternatives. So
Yeah, don't make me go into Discord. Don't make me go there.
So yeah, Playground is a beautiful front end. People can discover their communities, and the tools that we've built for the community organizer is the ability to connect their members all in one place, to drop any type of content, whether it's a real life event, virtual event, podcast, video, NFT merch, and more. And there's a lot of control when it comes to the organization of community. They can choose to make it public or private. They can choose which content goes behind a paywall or not. They can choose to token gate it or not. So they can token gate the entire community, or they can just token gate a specific drop. And it's really seamless. It's really easy, and we're designed to, be a really easy experience for those that might not be, Web3 deep end yet. And we think that's really important.
Yeah, fantastic. NFT, NYC, Korea Blockchain Week, Singapore Blockchain Week. This is my, very real experience as you laid it out. There's a Telegram group, and then there's absolutely every flavor of possible media connected to that, including, Eventbrite links and Google Map links and everything else. It's like maybe the Flintstones. There's a bird with a hammer and a chisel and a piece of granite handing you something, right? It's just absolutely just a disparate mess, and there needs to be something to address that pain point. And there's enter Playground. Ding.
Yeah. Yes. And, as much as we're users and want that, that to be in that flow of experience where we can, discover communities, join events, and just be together and do together, read, watch, listen, attend things together. The pain point for creators, it's not always their full-time job to community build. Some of these NFT projects or DAOs or other new communities, it's their passion project on the side, and their lives need to be made easier because they're the ones that are kind of weaving the social fabric of society back together. They have such an important role. And right now, the fragmentation for them is they'll pay $6 just for a link tree, just to link together all their social presences. And, all of these fees that come from ticketing sites or minting sites are taken from the trader. And the more hosting in your VR metaverses that these places to, organize your community are hosted, the more fragmented, like where the community is. And so we've built the tools that help you not just publish content, but manage the access that I was saying before, manage your members. So on Instagram, you might have 1 million or so followers. And a lot of these Web2 social platforms are meant for building audiences. But on Playground, you have a direct relationship to your members. So there's a way to kind of like get their wallet addresses and contact info to be able to text them or sync them to your mailing list, to be able to see how their user journey has been in your community. Did they come in through a one-off event, or did they come and subscribe to be a long-term member? So you can sort of see how deep the relationships are and maintain that and really own your own community and own your own data, which has been a big, point of discussion in Web 2. Besides managing your members and your content, we've got Web 2 and Web 3 on and off chain community insights that we think it's really important to know what the health of your community is, how much you're growing, where the chapters of your community might be in different cities. And if you're monetizing or not by quarter or by year, which is really important. And to be able to see what other interests your members have, what other communities are they joining, so that you might be able to identify future collaborators or brands that would be a good fit to collaborate with.
Wow, fantastic. Well said.
So there's a lot of utility and tools we've built. Yeah.
Certainly. And I think community specifically for Web3 is so often spoken about, and it is unquestionably incredibly important for the growth of Web3, but it's something that's really difficult not just to start, but to maintain and to grow. And it can be a full-time job and completely distracting. And in many ways, what you really want to do is spark the community and allow it to kind of grow through its kind of own flywheel, and to be able to kind of like step back and curate rather than really pulling the sled in a really hard way. So these tools I was very impressed when I first saw the demo and all the possibilities for this. And let's dig deep into that about your mission and vision for this and your personal hero's journey, taking all of the scabs and calluses and scar tissue that you got from Web 2 and donning that like armor to go into this Web 3 battle and do it in a really informed and, I think, evolved way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that my reason for starting, it really is true that all the dots connect backwards. Before I, was jumping into Web 3, I think I was exposed to the idea of, how to find community at a really young age. I grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, as one of the only Asian kids in school. My parents are Taiwanese, so Taiwanese and American in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So all my friends were Native American or Hispanic or Spanish, and I grew up around a lot of different cultures. So I realized really early on at a young age, it doesn't matter what you look like or where you're from per se, but that real connection happens when you share your cultures, share your experiences, and have meaningful relationships because you have a shared experience. So I think, that shaped my perception early on and just worldview of, how it's an advantage to kind of be as part of as many communities as you can, to kind of identify with as many different types of subgroups as you can, and it makes you more empathetic, and it also makes you an easier person to kind of talk to anyone and be in any kind of situation and feel like you belong anywhere, which is a great skill.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. And I carried that with me to UT Austin, where I went to school. And it's a very entrepreneurial town. I worked for venture capitalists that had an incubator um, while I was studying advertising in school. So I really saw them, grow a company and be with a rockstar team of entrepreneurs while I was studying branding and the notions of scaling, brand values and how to kind of create global iconic brands. And I saw that it was all about the big idea, and that, I really knew in college I wanted to start my own thing, but I wanted to do it from the perspective of brand building a product that actually lives up to the values that the brand says, versus like building something or having marketing try to fix it as communications after. I thought it was all very integrated. Yeah. But anyway, so that's where I got this entrepreneurial bug, where I was passionate about tech, knew I wanted to build something. And I graduated December of '08. I'm dating myself. I shouldn't say this publicly, but that was the first semester after, the first financial market crash in '08. So that really baked in me resiliency for sure. I traveled right after that. I spent a year in Taiwan and worked, but also traveled a lot of Asia. And then I spent a year in Prague and worked and traveled a lot of Europe. And I feel that if that time after college hadn't been what it was, I would have been kind of a workaholic that went straight into a career and never had those life experiences where I got to, experience even more cultures. So Playground was very much born from this passion to, just feel alive, new experiences, meeting new people, and really seeing that the whole world's a playground.
Can we peel that back a little bit more? The Taiwan experience and also Prague. I think in many ways, to be an entrepreneur, I sometimes advocate for people to do things that really put them out of their comfort zone, to go into a completely different culture, different language, really completely, everything, smells and food and architecture, and you're totally off balance and you're just trying to get your footing the whole time. Tell me about that transition to Taiwan. And you spoke Chinese growing up with a family around the dinner table. How did that feel culturally, linguistically, and work wise being there?
Yeah, it's funny. I think growing up, I spoke Chinese only to my parents, and there wasn't an Asian American community around me. I guess if we drove an hour to Albuquerque, my parents, they had some friends there, but really it didn't feel like there was an Asian American community. And so I grew up feeling the need to adapt and to fit in. So my comfort zone was doing that. And so when I was then in Taiwan and surrounded by only Asian Americans in this work program I was in, that was a new experience for me. And I learned to embrace my heritage and culture a little bit more. And I just found another side of myself that I was proud of. Whereas before I felt like I had to suppress it a little bit to fit in. So that was really interesting. And solo travel is always good for anyone. So I did a lot of these solo travels alone. And I did learn, and maybe it was naive of me, but what I really got from it was that people are essentially good and kind no matter where you are. Because I experienced so much hospitality, and got in so many different situations, like traveling alone in India, or if it's Korea, I won't go into some of these crazier stories, but it always was okay. And people were always super hospitable and kind to me. And I just learned we're all human. Doesn't matter what side of the world I'm on. People can identify with me. And so this really shaped my worldview. And then in Prague, one of my jobs was teaching English actually. And so that was really uncomfortable because all of the kids are blonde and blue eyed.
Me too. I did that too.
I read that about you, and I
Yeah. So
forgot
way
to
back in the
mention to
day.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
That's,
lived
yeah.
in I was living on Yuriho's Zeppoldbrad, like in Prague 3, like by the TV station.
Wow. Out there.
But
Yeah.
you know, yeah, and so I got introduced as, "Hey, here's your English teacher," to people that were very European, and I looked the way I do, and they're like, "You're the English teacher." So I think I've always been just in just a lot of interesting situations, and that was really really fun. And yeah, just like learning that, just like being scrappy and like traveling a lot. So a year in Asia, then a year in Europe, I really moved back to New York with a sense of like, oh, I really I really got along with people that had the same international perspective from that point on.
Thank you for sharing. That's great. I love how you said that before you even went to live in Taiwan or Prague, like your default setting was, I love to learn from and connect with other cultures, which is kind of unusual. So that's great that you already had that kind of superpower, heading out there, and also your optimistic, positive view of the world. I think I've traveled to 100 countries and I've lived in a dozen, and everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time, has breakfast, school or work and dinner, and maybe watch a little TV, go back to bed. Like everybody's pretty much the same. And people are generally good. And I think having that kind of optimistic, positive attitude is hugely important as an entrepreneur, because there's so many ways for things to go wrong that you really have to have this open and, very positive outlook towards the world, and, with realism. So I think that's a really, nice insight to your portal into your psyche.
Yeah. And you can see sort of the foundation laid for, a social community platform, in some of these stories. Like if you're traveling alone, let's say in India, which was my first solo journey, 6 weeks I went there. It was intense. I basically chose the most intense place, but there is technology out there where you can find a hotel instantly, where you can, order food instantly, like a lot of basic human needs. There's some app that's serving that, but then the higher emotional need of like, where can I find like-minded people on the other side of the world? It's already hard enough to connect in real life, but then when you're totally out of your element. And so I remember feeling like, oh, I'm just not, there's people you meet on the street, there's the vendors, there's, the people hosting you. And at the time I was staying in a hostel, and you're like, I don't really feel connected. But then through couch surfing, actually met this woman, and she had all her friends invite us to dinner. And then one of them was a copywriter at Ogilvy in Mumbai. And I had a career in advertising, which I'll get into later, but I was a copywriter. And I had connections to Ogilvy, and we kind of complained about the same accounts, like the same music, had the same taste in movies. And then he invited me out with his friends the next night in Bandra, and it was a lot of ad friends. And I felt like these were my friends in New York. I was like, I found someone who is living my life on the other side of the world. And it's like, oh, again, it goes back to shared values, shared interests. And then after I have shared experiences with them, they've opened up their house to me. They hosted me for dinner. I have these memories with them. And now, like when people talk about India or whatever, I have like such a different relationship and connection that's based in experience and not based on what you read or intellectualize. And I think, this was setting the foundation for my career, where then I went into portraying characters and stories and communities for commercials and for brands. And, I saw how, people's perception could be really informed by what they're consuming versus experiencing for themselves and knowing deeply. So I feel like that was a really important just perspective to go into my career with.
That's great. I love your upbringing, your travels, working abroad. Like that all is foundational for what you've built now. And take us into your advertising and web 2 career from there.
Yeah. So I moved to New York to start my career. And I basically then had, yeah, like a great time working my way up to a creative director at, at ad agencies. So started my career at Shy Day. They're known for doing all of Apple's ads.
Yeah, huge.
So yeah, and then my first client was actually Microsoft Xbox at a place called Crispin Porter. But I really got to experience a lot of social digital projects because that was like the rise of social media, and I got to have a front row seat to how it evolved from its inception. Um, and so I really became uh, yeah, like a go-to consultant for social digital activation for brands. Worked on everything from YouTube at 3 different agencies. So that was a front row seat to the creator economy before it was called creators or creator economy. And worked at Facebook too, and their Menlo Park headquarters. Really also saw how a social media company was run on the inside. Because I did so many digital projects, I got gaming projects as well. So in LA, worked on the launch of Activision's Destiny. We kind of took the world of the game and activated it within Google Maps, which a long time ago was like a cool new format. So yeah, new media was always really interesting to me. Worked on a lot of social platforms. Apple Beats by Dre, when they launched globally a campaign for their wireless headphones, or Converse when the Nike CMO took over and wanted to do a global rebrand to kind of refresh the brand. Like I was a creative lead on a lot of these really amazing cultural projects. And I was like, oh, it's really fun to work on tech brands because it's global impact, but it's also really cool to work on youth culture brands like a Beats or a Converse because that's almost the edge of culture. So when you see the edge of innovative tech meeting where leading edge of culture is, I thought that was just the most fun and kind of creative playground for my career to be. However, over the years, I got savvy to, is social media really doing a good job of connecting us? I saw that the life that I had in New York was so vibrant and full of community, and it's because all my friends were using Facebook events. I was joining Facebook groups where I found a lot of community with entrepreneur groups or women's groups. And then Messenger, it was not to passively chat with anyone. We all were using it to invite people to do things. So I saw it's helping me because I'm using it in an active way. And I'm not posting fake photos of my life that are filtered. I'm not doom scrolling. I'm not wasting my life scrolling. I'm actually using it to do things and it's making my life richer. And I'm like, this is how my friends use it. Why am I seeing an industry that, is thriving off of a lot of, content engagement that I know is keeping, young people on their phones over 4 hours a day, and also reading headlines that like people are more and more lonely, which is like something people don't talk about. And I'm like, oh, this is my industry. And I can sort of see it from the inside. Like, is this really good for people? And then people started to say, yeah, why is our data being sold? Is this really good for us? It's making us more anxious. And I'm like, there's tech isn't bad. And it's not that it can't connect us more deeply. It's just that Web2 social wasn't really designed intentionally. So I'll stop there because then it kind of all goes towards like what we've been doing in kind of the Web3 space.
Yeah, I love what you said, the intentional design. Was there really even necessarily an intention behind it when it was set up? And certainly not the intention that I believe that you have in setting up Playground, in how you want to be able to empower and really ultimately connect. And yeah, is social media even bad, or really is it how it's actually being incentivized and how it's being promoted? Like what's the flywheel? Is it a negative flywheel or is it a positive flywheel? And there's an opportunity to align the incentives and to create this positive flywheel. And I think the way to do that is to just transition into things that are on chain and have a completely different paradigm, so that you can create these virtuous cycles and kind of encourage that true human connection, make the creators truly empowered and compensated. So that's a really interesting insight, having worked on the inside there for so long.
Yeah, I think that it definitely will be a new paradigm and a new era of Web3 social when we see, what other, social projects have been building when they finally do come out. I think it will be totally different. I think because it's a new paradigm, we almost need new language around it. Like, I feel even calling it social media feels bad to me. I feel like, is it community media or is it social experience networks instead of like social media, And so I think I feel like a lot of Web3 language would probably be reinvented, just like social media is probably not the best terminology, but I do think, the idea behind Playground was in its name. So first and foremost, before Web2 or Web3 discussion, it was the idea that the whole world's a playground. And no matter who you are, that community surrounds you and that there's always new things to do and new people to meet. And we wanted to encourage active participation. We wanted to be a platform that's community centric, designed around shared experience. So like everything's a drop, like if something active is happening that you could jump into, whether it's virtual, real life, or in the metaverse. And that data should be private and should be decentralized. And so I think that, it's good to like learn from Web2 mistakes and then to build real utility. But there's a lot of work to be done still, including like how we talk about it even.
Indeed. Yeah, that's provocative. I hadn't really thought about changing the nomenclature, because it really does change the fundamental perception of it by changing the name. If you're just trying to just take the Web2 structure and then just turn it into Web3, people still have a lot of the legacy and baggage there. So I think maybe you're the person to do that, to start to promote something that's more. I think the whole community side, that's actually more of almost a Web1 idea. I was part of a community website. There was like GeoCities, and I was part of the founding team of a group called Rennerang that was before social media. So maybe we go back to the community side, which feels a little bit more substantial. So speaking of mistakes made from Web 2, or just mistakes or lessons learned in general, you have a really strong background in a lot of these larger organizations, and now that you've struck out on your own as an entrepreneur, tell us some of the trials and tribulations and triumphs along the way there, some of your lessons learned along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I had never fundraised before. So, presenting in an ad agency is really different than presenting to investors. So at an agency, everything is super polished and super perfect, right? And because it's like it's the last bit of polish for a global brand. And so I think that with investors, though, they just need you to be yourself, like the most yourself that you've ever been. And I think that, I had to unlearn some of these, like, the presentation style pitches, like, you have to like kind of connect with the investor and they trust you because you're being honest, not because it's the perfectly crafted pitch. So I just thought that the style of pitching was really different from one industry to another.
That's beautiful. Yes, that authenticity, the really true you, and the true you is pretty awesome. And they're basically, a lot of times, especially in the early stage, you're betting on the jockey and not the horse. So you have to really believe, okay, the horse and the racetrack, and okay, I get it, right? But like, I really have to believe in the jockey riding that horse because I don't really see much so far. So I have to really, really believe in them. And who is she? What's really going on there? So can you share an anecdote, like something that where you kind of evolved during that process and were able to change your pitch process? Like what were some of the actual like mechanics around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, learning just to, say I don't know sometimes, like just like I'll get back to you. I think that shows like a sense of confidence and strength and honesty. So I think that for a young entrepreneur, it's like I was, I you yeah, you can't know everything. And so like I think that I learned just to be comfortable with sometimes being saying like I'll get back to you. And, I think as each time I'm interacting with an investor and got back to them, they saw progress and they saw like an informed, thoughtful answer. And then that you can, have the confidence to come back to them like that. I think that was, it was a really different way of relating to investors. But I have to say, a lot of the mistakes that I could have made, I were avoided because of who I partnered with really early on. So I think I have a really unique journey in the fact that before I quit my job, I actually, approached my now co-founder and chairman, Jason, who was the founder of the agency I was working at. And he has started multiple companies and sold multiple companies. So I feel like she was sort of like, don't give that equity away, keep it. I've been through all of the stages all the way. And like, he's giving me a lot of tips. So actually, maybe the most important lesson is probably like find a mentor because you can't do it all alone. Definitely, I feel like the strength of a great entrepreneur is like, can you bring people in with you, especially now in Web3 where everyone's like decentralized and working. So definitely don't try to do it on your own. Find a mentor and like find your team, find your collaborators as the very first thing. You think about the idea, it's really about the team.
Great. Go, Jason. I think it's great to learn from your own mistakes, but it's way better to learn from other people's mistakes. Then you can make all new ones. It's okay. You're going to be making mistakes. You're going to be basically a mistake machine as an entrepreneur, and you just have to just chew through them and turn them into beautiful, elegant solutions all day, every day. But that's great. Excellent that you're able. That also speaks to you too, right? To be able to get somebody who really can give you that time and energy and guide you along the way. They really saw something in you.
Yeah. I think that also because I have like a varied background than other founders, it was easier maybe for me to care too much about the polish. Again, it goes back to kind of the industry I came from versus like in tech. It's just more like, it's just, it's like fast, just get it out there. It's okay if it's not perfect. People have said this before, but I think it relates especially to founders that, come from a very, a creative or visual industry where that matters. So I had to find my own balance of like what, I want to show it in a way it can be proud of. That's, to my colleagues and other fellow creatives is something that they can resonate with versus like unskinned tech product that maybe like more other types of founders would look at it just for its utility. Like I wanted to create something beautiful, but I did not want it to let it get in the way of building other things.
Well, you have certainly created something beautiful. I think it's a beautiful, elegant solution that UX UI and then the underlying, it's like the UX UI is a little tip of the iceberg, but then underneath all that incredible functionality that's come together in a super elegant way. So whatever you did, keep doing it. It's pretty terrific. Jia, really, really enjoyed my chat with you. Thanks so much for your time, and look forward to watching your evolution.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to having you along the journey. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast.
This podcast is for information purposes only and should not be considered as financial advice. Any opinions provided in this podcast reflect the views of the speakers only.